Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for joining us wherever you are joining us from. My name is Tesfa Peterson, and I'm pleased to be one of your co-moderators for this evening's Ladi Community Heritage and Honors Program in collaboration with the IPE Dare to Understand Heritage Education Series, the Grenada Education and Development Program Grenada, Caribbean Freedom Fighters, and the Grenada National Reparations Committee. This evening, we're coming together for the sixth in a series of lectures honoring the person of Helen Louise Langdon Little and her son, Malcolm X, and their life journey, remembering, memorializing, commemorating, and honoring their life and legacy. This evening, we are pleased to have with us a panel of excellent scholars who will be exploring topics of Pan-Africanism, thinking about the current moment that we're in with the pardoning of UNIA stalwart Marcus Garvey, thinking about Malcolm X and his relationships to continental Africa. How do we reflect on Malcolm X's liberation consciousness 100 years after his birth and 60 years after his assassination? President Joe Biden's decision to pardon Marcus Garvey, a renowned civil rights leader, has sent shockwaves of excitement through Black diaspora communities worldwide. Garvey, who passed away in 1940, was a pivotal figure in the Pan-African movement, advocating for Black pride, self-reliance, and unity. Garvey's conviction in 1923 for mail fraud was widely seen as a politically motivated move to silence him. His sentence was commuted by President Calvin Coolidge in 1927, but the conviction remained a stain on his legacy. This pardon is a crucial step towards honoring the legacy of a civil rights icon and repairing the systemic injustices that have plagued Black communities for centuries. This pardon also holds profound significance for Black diasporic communities as Garvey's work continues to inspire generations of activists, artists, and leaders. His legacy extends far beyond his own lifetime, influencing iconic figures such as our own Grenadian mother and son, Helen Louise Langdon and Malcolm X. Helen's relationship to Garveyism is well documented, as noted by scholars like Dr. Eric McDuffie and our own Dr. Maul Collins. Helen's political consciousness was developed in part by her uncle, a dedicated Garveyite. After moving away from Grenada in the early 20th century, Helen Louise took her Garveyism and her knowledge to the Montreal UNIA, ultimately marrying fellow Garveyite Earl Little. When Helen Louise left Grenada in 1917, she could not have imagined the impact that move would make. Part of our mission continues to be to inspire a new generation of leaders and activists in Grenadian communities at home and abroad by ensuring that Garvey's vision of a united and empowered Black diaspora continues to resonate throughout the world in the life and legacy of our beloved Helen Louise Langdon Little. We are pleased to welcome with us this evening to this evening's program, held under the theme Remembering, Memorializing, Commemorating, Honoring the Life's Journey and Legacy of Helen Louise Emily Langdon Little and Malcolm X, Their Legacy, Our Heritage, Our History. This public education forum is being facilitated by the Ladigue Community Heritage Honors Program in collaboration with the IPE Dare to Understand series. This evening, I welcome you again to what is bound to be a very exciting, very thought-provoking, and very inspiring lecture. Before we get into this evening's program, just a little background on the IPE and the IPE Dare to Understand Heritage series. The IPE is the Institute for People's Enlightenment, which was incorporated in Grenada in June 2004. The IPE has no has been mandated to carry on business of a philanthropic, charitable, and educational nature. And some of its objectives are to stage people's education fora, special lectures, seminars, and workshops geared towards popular education and the enlightenment of people, and to foster the recognition and commemoration of hallmark historical and cultural figures and events, two of the mandates that we are proud to be undertaking this evening. As we move through this evening's program, I urge you to sit back, relax, enjoy, think of questions that you may have for our panelists. At this time, I'm pleased to welcome to give a little background on the Ladigue heritage work from the Ladigue community, Marieve Wells Marrast. Marieve?
Hi, Tesfa, and thank you so much for your opening reflection and setting the tone for this evening's proceeding. Good evening, everyone. The Ladigue Community Heritage and Honors Program began in 2019 with the formation of a working committee of IPE and Ladigue community volunteers. Its main aim was to organize a commemorative emancipation lecture delivered by Professor Moll Collins in July of 2019. In that same year, and during that same period, July 2019, the program included the lecture, a goodwill concert, and exhibition, all staged at the Holy Innocents Anglican Primary School, which was a school attended by Louise Little. In the intervening years, the development of the Ladigue Community Heritage and Honors Program and the staging of the annual community public education lectures on the third Monday of February from 2020 to present, with the support of the Ladigue diaspora community, the IPE, Caribbean Freedom Fighters, Grenada, and for the first time, the Grenada National Reparations Committee, GNRC. Looking forward, we have the pending registration of the Ladigue Community Heritage Honors Organization as a full-fledged NGO. And that's something that we look forward to give our organization status. And on a special note, I would like to mention that as an organization, we are also happy to partner with other groups. And we recently started the first steps or initial steps in partnering with a diaspora Ladigue community development and enrichment partnership, which you will hear a little bit about later on in the program. At this time, I would like to invite one of the founding directors of the Ladigue Community Heritage and Honors Program to bring some brief remarks and to do a citation on Louise Little's life. Lindona Laguerre is a teacher for the last 20 years at the Boca Secondary School. She specializes in the teaching of French and has previously taught both English A and English B. She holds a Bachelor of Education degree in Language Education, Literatures of English from the UWI Open Campus, and a Master's of Arts degree in Learning and Teaching from the University of Roehampton, London. She is also a certified DEFL, French Language Diploma Instructor and Examiner, and has completed various certificate courses in French language learning and pedagogy. Let's welcome Lindona to give her remarks.
Thank you, Marieve. Good evening, everyone, and a special welcome to our scholars this evening, Professor Austin, Dr. Jacobs, Dr. Gyamfi, and a warm welcome to everyone joining us on the program tonight in Grenada and in the diaspora. And we hope that tonight's session will be informative and you will go forth and make your mark as future influencers. Citation to honor Louise Helen Norton Little née Langdon. Helen Norton Little née Langdon, granddaughter of Jupiter and Mary Jane Langdon, to be liberated Africans, was in 1896 on Grenadian soil in the village of Ladigue St. Andrews. A proud daughter of Grenada, Louise read everything she could. She was particularly concerned with the mistreatment of people of color in her community. She took that love for words and activism with her to Montreal in 1917, where she became a stalwart member of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, an organization founded by Marcus Garvey, the Black nationalist leader. Her involvement in the UNIA led to her meeting with Earl Little, a Baptist preacher, another activist. 2 years later, Earl and Louise were married in the US and went on to have 7 children. Along with her husband, Earl Little, she built a legacy of Black fortitude and pride, one based on shared commitment to political change and activism. A legacy that was furthered by the life pursuits of their children, of which Malcolm X was the fourth. As an active member of the UNIA and UNIA secretary, she was lauded to have actively worked alongside Earl in promoting the UNIA ideals and rumored to have played a pivotal role in the editing, publishing, and distribution of the Negro World, the Garveyite newspaper. Her close working relationship extended to letter writing and providing a place of refuge when he was being hunted by the FBI. Louise Little, daughter of Ladigue, an activist, a proud Black woman, an educator, a mother, we honor you today. We honor your legacy as a brilliant thinker, a committed activist, a proud and resilient woman. Your love for your people and concern for their struggles was eloquently expressed in your life work and in the lives of your children. Our Grenadian hearts burst with pride and with the knowledge that your activism was cultivated right here on Grenadian soil, providing everlasting inspiration for future generations of Grenadian women. We are proud to call you our own. Your commitment to education and Black nationalism are to be emulated. You gave the world a great gift in the life and legacy of your son Malcolm. Your son was proud to tell the world of your proud spirit and your dedication to educating your children while doing your best to protect them in a racist society. For all the ways that you fought on the side of the oppressed, we are proud to call you our own. We honor you, daughter of Ladigue, proud product of our Grenadian soil, an example to educator extraordinaire. We are proud to call you our own. We honor you. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe.
Thank you very much, Lindana, for that beautiful citation lauding the life and work of our dear foremother and Ladigue native, Helen Louise Neil Langdon. At this time, I'm pleased to offer some information on one of our dear partners for this evening's program, the Grenada National Reparations Committee. This evening's discussion will cover the gamut from thinking with the tenets of the UNIA in the current moment, but also thinking that in terms of diaspora, thinking about our connections to the African diaspora, our connections to the African continent as people of the African diaspora. And the CARICOM Reparations Committee has been doing work to that end for more than a decade. And in Grenada, our own Grenada National Reparations Committee, a 9-member committee, was appointed by Cabinet on March 15th, 2021, under the purview of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, with the mandate to establish the moral, ethical, and legal case for the payment of reparations by governments of all of the former colonial powers and the relevant institutions of those countries, in the nations and people of the Caribbean community, for the crimes against humanity of native genocide, the transatlantic slave trade, and a racialized system of chattel slavery. Some of the mandates include to provide advice, make policy recommendations to Grenada's cabinet, specifically to the Minister with responsibility for reparations, and to coordinate a national strategy to implement those activities. Another mandate is to engage in public education, advocacy, negotiations, diplomacy and outreach, and partnerships such as these for the development and implementation of the Grenada Reparations Program. So we thank the Grenada National Reparations Committee for being one of our collaborators for this evening's event. And I now pass you over to my co-moderator, who will introduce our first panelist this evening.
Thank you. Our first panelist this evening is Dr. Bright Gyamfi. He's an assistant professor of history at the University of California, San Diego, and a former presidential fellow at Northwestern University. Gyamfi's research sits at the intersection of West African and African diaspora, intellectual history, nationalism, Pan-Africanism, Black internationalism, and economic development. He writes on African intellectuals who worked to transform and to radicalize the study of Africa in academic and intellectual centers around the Atlantic. He has received research fellowships and grants from several organizations and institutions, including the Social Science Research Council, the Fulbright IIE, the U.S. Department of State's Benjamin A. Gilman International Scholarship Program, Northwestern University, the University of Oxford, and the University of Notre Dame. His work has appeared in the Journal of African American History, African Studies Review, Africa is a Country, and The Conversation. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in History Honors and Political Science from the University of Notre Dame, and Masters of Science in African Studies from the University of Oxford, and a PhD in History from Northwestern University. Bright is Ghanaian by birth and will deliver the 2025 IPE and UE Annual Commemorative Emancipation Public Lecture on Monday, July 28th. That's the date we have to mark in our calendars. On the topic, The African Struggle is Our Struggle, the African Dimensions of the Grenadian Revolution. Let's welcome Dr. Bright Gyamfi as he shares with us this evening.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And I'm also very grateful to the IPE for their invitation and for my colleagues here today. So today I've been thinking about what to talk about when it comes to Malcolm X. Most of the time when we think about Malcolm X, Louise Little, the story, especially coming from the US, is a very much a US-centered narrative. And this narrative was also cemented by the autobiography of Malcolm X that Alex Haley crafted. And in it, we don't get a true sense of the internationalism that shaped the politics of Malcolm X, as well as his mother, Louise Little. So my invitation is what happens when we think about these internationalism, when we think about the role of Africa, continental Africa, and its connection to the diaspora, which brings us to Marcus Garvey. Garvey was heavily influenced by an activist from the Gold Coast named Chief Sam. They both were in London together, and Chief Sam also embodied this idea of the Back to Africa movement. The Back to Africa movement, which Marcus Garvey takes to another level with his UNIA movement that he establishes first in Jamaica, which Louise Little becomes a member. Marcus Garvey's idea of back to Africa, of rupturing this colonial racial order that sought to create a hierarchy of Black people at the bottom with whiteness at the top, was significant. And it was this significance of rupturing the colonial racial order was part of the attempt to silence, erase, and defame somebody like Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey had a major influence on a young Ghanaian intellectual who came to the United States to come and study by the name Kwame Nkrumah. When Nkrumah was coming to the US to study at Lincoln University, which we all know is a historically Black university in Philadelphia, when he was in London, when he was waiting for his visa to be approved to come to the US, Italy had just invaded Ethiopia. And Nkrumah recalled that he felt that the whole of London had attacked him, that he was coming to understand the connection between the colonial imperialist project was not one that can be thought about as a local phenomenon, but as a global enterprise. When he comes to the United States, he goes to Harlem. And we have to understand that Harlem is a space of Black internationalism. It's a space where scholars and activists from the Caribbean, from the US, from the African continent are having conversation about what it means to be Black, about what it means to create a world after empire. And this was what was shaping these intellectuals. It was in Harlem where Nkrumah began to read extensively the works of Marcus Garvey, his Back to African movement, his idea that Black people must unite, that we must challenge the negative stereotypes that have shaped the way Black people were being conceived. It was this negative representation of Black people as backwards, as primitive, that gave birth to the first Pan-African movement in 1900 that took place in London. Fast forward, when we get to 1945, you have the Fifth Pan-African Congress. And what makes the Fifth Pan-African Congress unique was the battle to argue that Africans and people of the Caribbean want their independence now. There was the famous slogan, independence today, independence now, which shifted away from these previous conception of a gradual movement towards independence. And scholars and activists like George Padmore from Trinidad and Tobago, Kwame Nkrumah, W.B. Du Bois from the United States made the argument that the battle for independence must be waged on the African continent. Fast forward a few years after the Fifth Pan-African Congress, Kwame Nkrumah returns to Ghana and by 1957 leads Ghana to its independence. And on Independence Day, Nkrumah famously states that we are today, he declares that the Black man is capable to show the world that they are ready to govern themselves. He goes on to say that Ghana's independence is meaningless unless it is linked with a total liberation of the African continent. Ghana, for so many people, became a haven for Black global political activity. Kwame Nkrumah supported many African leaders who were seeking to break away from colonial domination. He gave them support. Those who were coming from the Caribbean, he offered them support as well. As a matter of fact, there were a number of Caribbean thinkers, intellectuals who were part of Nkrumah's cabinet. Most prominently, George Patmore, who had created the African Bureau to ensure that Ghana was helping to coordinate other anti-colonial activities wherever Black people found themselves. To the point that during Ghana's independence, Martin Luther King came to Ghana to witness this important achievement. Du Bois, who had had his passport taken away from him, was also in Ghana, where he became a Ghanaian citizen. As a matter of fact, in 1909, Du Bois had come up with the project entitled the Encyclopedia Africana, where he wanted to study the culture and the politics of African peoples globally. Unfortunately, Du Bois could not get the funding and the support that he needed. But in 1962, in Nkrumah's Ghana, he got the necessary support to undertake this massive and important project. For so many people, Ghana had become, in the words of the historian, African-American historian Kevin Gaines, Ghana had become the destination of radical hope. It was this destination of radical hope that a young Grenadian activist found himself. Malcolm X came to Ghana to also witness this particular moment in history. In the biography of Malcolm X, Alex Haley does not, in my humble opinion, do a better job describing the impact of this visit for Malcolm X. In the biography, Alex Haley just notes Malcolm X met a chief. Full stop. The chief that Malcolm X met was called Nana Kwabena Nketia IV. Here was a chief, a traditional chief, who had broke ranks with other chiefs as well to side with Nkrumah to declare independence. He was arrested by the colonial government. His bones were broken. His palace was destroyed because he wanted his people to be free. And after independence, he was on stage with Nkrumah, where he advised the president to create the Institute of African Studies to challenge the way that Africa had been perceived. And it was at this moment in time that he connected with Malcolm X. And in order to get a better picture of what took place at that meeting, we have to look at the autobiography of Maya Angelou, All of God's Children Need Traveling Shoes, where she takes the time to detail that particular moment. Maya writes, and I quote, "When Malcolm met Nana Nketia, the two men acted magnetized. I had not heard Nana speak so quietly, nor seen Malcolm listen so deeply." End of quote. This particular relationship gives us the import of what Africa and African American and African diaspora relations meant for the global liberation of Black people. That it begs the question that we cannot think about these global entanglement as separated. When Nkrumah was overthrown, backed by the CIA in 1966, people like Nketia had to be pushed into exile because the new military government that came into power was very much anti-Nkrumah. But these relationships then helped Nketia to come to the United States. Maya Angelou played a key role in this relationship, and whereby Nketia helped establish the Institute Black Studies departments in the United States, specifically at UMass Amherst. And when he was at UMass Amherst, he connected with Black Power intellectuals, people like Stokely Carmichael, Michael Thirlwell from Jamaica. And Nketiah had also spent significant amount of time traveling through the African diaspora in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Brazil, Suriname. And he began to understand the import of stressing the ongoing similarities between Africa and the African diaspora. Malcolm X, through his travel, also came to understand the import of Africa and its relation to the rest of the world. He will go on, Malcolm X, to try to convince a number of African leaders to take the United States to court, to the UN, and sue them for human rights. Malcolm's story is a global story. It's a story in which Grenada is pivotal to this particular project. It is a story where the African continent is pivotal at this juncture. It is not just an American story, but it is a global story. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gyamfi, for that thought-provoking historical journey that calls on us to shift our perspective. Because oftentimes, as we hear Malcolm X, and sometimes you get the comment, why are we commemorating his story here in Grenada? Why are we having this? And I think you did an excellent job, because Malcolm X's story, the US-centric story that they sells us, is not his entire story. And we see the Pan-Africanism, the Caribbean, the globe, the world. And we see Grenada, as you rightly said, it's a global story. And Grenada has a pivotal role in that story. So as we reflect on your words, I would like to, just admonish our listeners and everyone present with us today to think beyond. Don't be afraid to widen your horizon and to learn, to delve deeper, because there is a connection. And we can see that radical spirit and the negative perspective that they sometimes paint of Blacks or Africans, we have to always challenge it, because there was a purpose in that meeting, in those travels, and there is a connection right there. So thank you again, Dr. Gyamfi. I now hand you over to my co-moderator, Tesfa.
Thank you, Marieve. Thank you, Dr. Gyamfi. At this time, we are pleased to welcome our second panelist for the evening, Dr. Editha Nancy Fergusson-Jacobs, who has celebrated 49 years as a graduate teacher and specialist lecturer in Caribbean history, culture, and African art history. She has done much research on the intangible heritage and origins of the Barbados landship. She's the author of the book, Full Steam Ahead, Locating the Barbados Landship, which ensures that the people of Barbados have a better understanding of their African origins in Ghana, there's that place again, and the role of ASAFO institutions. Dr. Jacobs spent 7 years in Grenada, where she was employed as a senior lecturer, wrote several courses on aspects of Caribbean cultures for the T.A. Marischal Community College. She then became chair of the Department of Humanities, Arts, and Culture until her return to Barbados in 2012. At present, she is an independent scholar who does lectures and curates on African art and culture and aspects of the African heritage in the Caribbean. She is now semi-retired. Let's welcome Dr. Jacobs. Unmute yourself for us, Dr. Jacobs. Thank you. Dr. Jacobs, we're not hearing you. You need to unmute yourself, please. Just to the left corner, you'll see the audio button. Dr. Jacobs? Just to the left-hand corner at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little mic. Can you press your mic to unmute yourself?
Good evening.
Beautiful.
Just didn't want me to speak. I wonder why. Yes, good evening to all listening in. I deem it a privilege and a pleasure to be here and to thank Professor Gyamfi for his words. Quite a lot of things that I didn't know there, especially in Katia. Nana in Katia, because I believe at some point in time I did meet him because he has done a lot on music. He has done a lot on music. I also needed to speak on the IPE to say, you know, encouragement to them as well to continue and the work that they have been doing over the years. Very important work. But at this time, I think we have to kind of firm up on the work that we are doing and to make it more Caribbean. We need to, as I see now that Grenada is celebrating Emancipation Day on the 1st of August, and I look at that and I said, very good. We all should celebrate those things on the same day. There are lots of things happening in Grenada. I like what's happening in terms of this particular type of lecture series that they're doing to dare to be, I know if we say dare to be like a David, but we need to be doing more of this kind of work. And the other aspect that I am seeing happening now is we need to do more work on Africa, because if we don't know about Africa, there's no way that we're going to accept a lot of the things that are going to be coming out. There are a lot of changes that are coming, and we don't know exactly how it's going to come, but we must be prepared for some of these changes. I knew about Marcus Garvey really because of my grandfather, who was a Garveyite. And in Barbados, I remember listening to other people talking about the seamen, those men who were working on the ships and so forth. They used to bring in a lot of the UNIA, the books, you know, the newspapers and all of these things used to come in. So people knew what was going on, especially when you're talking about Ethiopia and the incursion by the Italians. Many people were supporting Ethiopia. Not only just like say in the Caribbean, but from a distance, they were really working hard. And when we hear about Marcus Garvey and the work, the UNIA, these are things that were great, had a lot of influence, but still, I'm still saying that it is not enough. It is not enough, really, just to say, well, he did this or this. And when we even think about Malcolm X, nobody would know that he's anything other than an American, which he wasn't really and truly. When if like now, everybody wants you to go back to where you came from. Where would he go? He would have to travel with his mother. So these are some of the things now that we have to look at. Yes, we know now that it is a history that has been there since 1900s, and then in 1920s, that played a great part in some of the changes that took place in Africa as well. And my main thing is we need to know it. We need it in the Caribbean. Schools have to have this knowledge. People are going to say, you're asking, did you know that Malcolm X's mother was from Grenada? No. Where did you get that from? I said, it is known, it is history. And if you want to find out more about it, come to the lectures. So we have to be doing them and be more connected. It's good that we can have people still in Canada, people coming from Ghana, and that's one of my areas that I really think a lot about. I've been twice, but my thing is also to work on the ASAFO group and to show the connection really with a group that we have in Barbados. So we are looking at some of these things to, show that we are interested and we are ready to help. We're ready to fight the fight. It is going to be a rough fight, but we have to start. We have to button up and get ready to move. These are some of the things that are going to be happening. It's good to know all the other Pan-Africanists, some the ones that we still have here. There's some in Barbados, I know, some in Grenada, but we don't ever get anybody really together. So I thank you, Professor, for your words. It's important, and that we can do this probably another time in another way. An exhibition of something, if we could have some African art. People don't see the importance of African art. I completed my master's in doing African art, 1996. And would you believe that it is not really on the books? No. You think people want us to learn about ourselves? We are hearing all about the young men and the young women and all of that. They don't have a chance. But if they knew, I'm sure they would start to think about themselves in a different light. Do something different. Make the choices, better choices. You don't have to be taking a gun to show some person that you're strong. In some cases, it shows how weak we are. So this time I will say thank you very much for your words and listening to hear more from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jacobs, for that very powerful admonition that we need to, like you say, prioritize our knowledge, prioritize our collective Caribbean knowledge. I am somewhere in Montreal in Canada, but I am very much Grenadian, from very much Chantemelle in Grenada. And I have about 3-4 people from Chantemelle waving at me in the chat right this minute. So my Grenadian credentials are very, very firmly on the ground, but I really take on board your admonition that the work that we are doing needs to continue. It needs to continue in the spirit of African diasporic knowledge that we offer to our people, that our people prioritize. We also need to continue to think with these philosophical traditions in light of the current moment that we're in, as you say, in light of these huge shifts that are taking place globally. And fortunately, we have the background, we have what it takes. We have people who have thought these things through and can offer us wonderful tools to think about it. So thank you, Dr. Jacobs, and we're going to, for sure, continue this discussion this evening. A brief program note, because I know people looked at the program, and initially we had 3 panelists. If you're in Canada, you know that we are blanketed under unprecedented snow. And one of our panelists, we're still hopeful that he may get on, Dr. Dave Austin, but he has lost power due to all the chaos that's happening outside at the moment. So we're still very hopeful that he can join us, but just so you know, he's yes, he's fallen prey to being snowed in and all the work that's happening outside as a result of the snow. At this time, it's my pleasure to bring back Lindonna Laguerre, who is going to read a citation in honor of Malcolm X. Lindonna.
To honor our brother Malcolm. Our brother Malcolm, we hail you. Son of the Grenadian, daughter of the soil of Ladigue, we hail you. A clarion voice for oppressed people all over the world, we hail you. Malcolm X, as he came to be known internationally, was born to Earl and Louise Little on May 19, 1925, in a time when Jim Crow laws determined the destinies of Black people in America. Malcolm came to manhood in these turbulent times. His autobiography tells of the family's many encounters with the white racial order of the day. These encounters led to the apparent assassination of his father at the hands of white supremacists and the eventual splitting up of his family. Young Malcolm was a handful. His early life was full of action and adventure, most of it on the other side of the law. Detroit Red, as he came to be known in the streets, ended his run in prison. The Malcolm X that the world came to know was formed in these years in prison. As he says in his own words, I have often reflected upon the new vistas that reading has opened up to me. I knew right there in prison that reading had changed forever the course of my life. As I see today, the ability to read awoke inside of me some long dormant craving to be mentally alive. Here we salute the intellectual giant, the global civil rights icon, the man of conviction and spirit, who we call our brother Malcolm. Brother Malcolm, we salute you for your commitment to the cause of oppressed people around the world. Brother Malcolm, we salute you for taking a stand against injustice, saying, those who stand for nothing will fall for anything. Brother Malcolm, we salute you for advocating for education as the passport to a bright future and for the part you played in educating generations of oppressed people all over the world. Today, as Grenadians, we are proud to be part of your legacy. We are proud to call you a son of the soil, a Grenadian whose influence was felt on a global scale and whose life continues to resonate today. We take up your call to fight for justice and freedom for all. We salute your sacrifice in giving your life for the cause of freedom. We will never forget. Brother Malcolm, we salute you. Ashe, ashe, ashe.
Thank you, Lindonna. And we have collaborated. We have a number of partners that we have worked with put on this lecture this evening. So at this time, I would just like to share with you a brief note on one of our collaborating partners, Grenada. Grenada is the acronym for the Grenada Education and Development Program. Grenada is nearly 30-year-old. It is a nearly 30-year-old development organization and it is a catalyst for youth empowerment and sustainable development, striving to continuously regenerate the hope and development of youth within the rural areas of Grenada, educationally and socially. And I must say that that's just words on paper, but it's words in action, because I myself, as a student in secondary school, has learned a lot and gained a lot from being part of this organization. Up to today, I'm still part of it as a volunteer. Its vision is to work with the youth in rural communities, using education as a catalyst for individual and communal empowerment, leadership, and transformation. Provide Grenada with educational opportunities and resources to achieve economic stability, equality, and poverty reduction. Grenada provides students with tuition fees, transportation allowance, meals, and other necessary school supplies, training young persons to take leadership roles in their schools, community, and churches, avoiding dropouts from school because of lack of finances, uniforms, food, and other school supplies. Grenada also leads in youth empowerment, providing access to education for communities in the hosting of community cleanups and leadership development training seminars. To date, throughout the Tri-Island state, Grenada has supported hundreds of students at the secondary level who have gone on to become doctors, nurses, veterinarians, mechanics, teachers, coaches, and more.
Thank you, Marieve. Like we said earlier, this evening's event is very much rooted in an ethics of collaboration. At this time, we are moving into a sort of more reflective and dialogical part of the evening. I invite those of you who are listening in the audience to think about questions that you may have for our panelists. We're going to have a question and answer period. The moderators will take your questions if you put them in the chat. Those of you who are listening on Facebook, you may want to put your questions as well, or on YouTube. But at this time, we're going to take some time to have our two panelists maybe offer some reflections on one another's presentations, or offer some reflections thinking about what one another has offered. And then we, the moderators, have a couple of questions for you to reflect on as well. So I turn it over to Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Gyamfi.
I just wanted to say, Dr. Jacobs, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation and for inviting us to think about African arts and the role of Africa, both in the way that we teach African history, the way we teach African arts, because there is an intentionality in the erasure of African arts, of African history. I was once having a conversation with a fellow African person who was dismissing African literature. So I asked the person why. He said, "Oh, it's useless, it's pointless. What, you're not going to get a job. What are we going to do with it?" I'm like, "Oh, that is very interesting. However, have you thought of the fact that a Kenyan writer, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, writes a novel and it lands him in jail? Why? Have you thought of the fact that the Nigerian playwright Soyinka writes a series of plays and he runs into exile in Ghana? There's so many examples that the fact that the songs written by Bob Marley, his redemption song, is a citation of the quotes and words of Garvey and other intellectuals who have come before him, right? That there's a way in which history, music, and art are the physical expressions of the battle for Black liberation. That these arts are so integral into the process of thinking about liberation. that we need to pay attention to these things, that we have to ask ourselves that why are certain arts undervalued, listed as primitive, then European arts and others being lifted as this is modern, this is what we're supposed to be accepting, and we are pushing other things aside, especially when it comes to our people. Why is it that we don't want anything to do with Africanness? If you pay attention to the language of Malcolm X and for others, he invites those on the African diaspora to borrow the term Africans, that we are Africans. And Nkrumah famously states that to be African is not just to be born on the continent. Whether you were born in the Caribbean, whether you're born in Latin America, that there is a revolutionary aspect of claiming Africanness that allows us to reject the colonial imposition that comes with the term African, because Africa has been demonized. What is demonized as Black, that people are running away, is Africa, because the only way that Africa comes through the New World is through the enslavement of its people. So what happens, as Dr. Jacobs was inviting us to think about the Asafo? These are warrior groups coming from the Akan, modern day Ghana and other places, that when we hear those stories, these people are not as victims, but as those who are fighting for liberation, that completely changes the way we think about our own society. When we look at the complex systems of governance, the important role of women within the Akan system, that changes the way that we think about democracy. Because when Queen Elizabeth died, everybody knew who was going to be the next in line. But within the Akan system, it's not that way. It's a woman who then elects, appoints somebody. The person is then vetted and voted on. That, to me, is a reading of democracy. But within the Western framework of democracy, they trace their lineage to the Greeks. And that form of democracy is explicit in its erasure and pushing back that Black people were not entitled to citizenship. So what Africa gives us is a new mode of philosophical thinking, an ontological being that invites us not to reject what we are being told to reject, but to question why we're being told to reject this. And that is why I was very, very excited, Dr. Jacobs, when you highlight the importance of the arts and of music in the reclaiming of Black identity and liberation. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I had already spoken of what you had to say, but it was so much that you would hardly be able to cover. You can see that how much work you had really studied on Malcolm X. All the different Pan-Africanists from Trinidad and all over. So yes, you did make all of those things which happened already, but we are looking now to the things that can happen now. Those happened, yes. So we do have a change, and we have to take those things into consideration, how we are going to move. And as I just said about teaching African art, I have now started back teaching African art. And the students are saying, Mom, but why are we doing this now? We should have done this 2 or 3 years ago. Because it is so much. They're saying, all these ethnic groups you're telling me about, how would I be able to ever know which people produced what work, And just here recently, when I say recent, like in the last 10 years, there was something that happened, it leaked out, that in Jamaica, there was a foundry that was actually a group of enslaved the people who knew how to smelt and do the wrought iron work. And so that shows you too that those persons in England, was there really an industrial revolution? It was based on the work which our people had done, not theirs. They patent all the things. They can do that well. They can do that. They can steal those things from you. But a time will come. A time will come. How are somebody's asking how we going to undo the demonizing of Africa? We have to take part in that ourselves. And by working on that ourselves, we will start to free ourselves. We have to free ourselves. Nobody's going to be able to do that for us. We have to let go of a lot of the colonial things and let the truths come out. Let the truths come out.
Yes.
So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Gyamfi, for those reflections. And I have a question. And it comes against a backdrop. I hope I paraphrase or get the quote correct. The Black man is capable to shape the world himself. I think that was from Dr. Gyamfi's presentation. And I'm thinking here about the whole idea of Pan-Africanism and Pan-African consciousness, that when we basically shift our thinking and we look at the work of Helen Louise Langdon Little and her son Malcolm X, how can we sorry for that, but how, or what lessons rather, can we draw from them in our community work and activism? And can you also expound a bit on how does that Pan-African consciousness figure into the life and the work of Helen Louise and her son Malcolm X? Because I think you both presenters touched on it a bit, but just to expound on that and what lessons as a community organization can we draw from them?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say that a lot of the work that they did was not against the backdrop of understanding what they were doing. That was from within. And I believe that those are things that are going to happen to our people like that all over the world, all over, because it was recent. I would still say recent because even 50 years is recent. When we look at the makeup, melanin, and they're telling you now that, Black people have 9 parts and the other people only have 6. So therefore, a lot of the things that we do, we don't even understand how we can do them. People who can speak 12 and 13 languages, and Black people, and we would say, well, we here in the Caribbean, you speak 1 or 2 languages or something, but it is known that they can do so much more. I don't think it was really on the based on the background, Marieve. It wasn't on the background that they had known these things or understood them. Because remember, living a life is you just doing what you know. When you leave from one place and you move to another place, you still continue that life that you know. Women always have a thing to look after their children and to make sure that they're educated. Those were some of the things that were really steeped in our women. So that could be one way of looking at it, and thinking of the communities that we have, like Ladig, and there are many around. who are pushing for other things, welcome them, and let's go on. Yes, sir. You can.
To build on what Dr. Jacob is saying too, I really like the philosophy of IPE to dare to understand that there is a radicalism of Black people daring to know what is being prevented from them getting to know. Right? That is why it's on this basis that Stokely Carmichael talks about the job of the conscious is to make the unconscious conscious. Hence, there is a philosophy of stressing on education. Difference between two types of education. There's an education of enslavement, and it's an education of citizenship and liberation.
Right.
That philosophy of education of liberation that does not necessarily exist in the halls of the classroom. That can exist in the halls outside of the classroom, on the streets of Harlem, on the streets of Accra or St. George's, Port of Spain. That sort of education of liberation, that although in Grenada, they might not teach about the Grenadian Revolution, people and their families are teaching their daughters and sons to preserve this history.
Oh, yes.
It is that tradition that Malcolm and Louise Little, invites us to continue in that type of education, an education for liberation. And even my talk that I'll be giving in July, the emphasis on the African struggle is our struggle, was a kind of commitment of Black internationalism that whatever happens on the continent of Africa, on the Caribbean, should matter to us. So when Malcolm X was standing in New York and was given a speech, he tells the Black people that whatever is happening to Congo is happening to you. That we have to take these things very, very seriously. There's a kind of Pan-African engagement. There was a Ghanaian scholar by the name Dovia Fessi who attended the Grenadian Revolution, the 1-year anniversary, at the invitation of Maurice Bishop. And he writes a piece that what is happening in Angola we should not think about, what is happening to Angola is isolated from what is happening in the Caribbean or happening elsewhere. That the fight for Black liberation has to be Pan-Africanized. It is that philosophy of Pan-Africanization is what the life and the story and the lessons of Little and X invites us to grapple with.
Right.
Thank you very much for those very spirited discussions and conversations. Yes, I couldn't agree more that we have a rich diasporic legacy of knowledge building that flows into our community work and our community building, and that thrust for education beyond the classroom, which, as we know, this classroom construct that we're in is still very much a colonial construct. And so how do we move education beyond schooling and into spaces like these, into different kinds of spaces, spaces of the streets, where Walter Rodney would tell us, by the side of the road, in the gullies, in the schools, right? How do we think through education for liberation, grounded in this ethos of a Pan-African consciousness? So thank you for that. I have a question that has to do with what we observe as a sort of rapprochement between Africa and the Caribbean that has been happening recently. However, framed more in a development kind of frame, a sort of economic development frame, rather than maybe the kind of things that we're thinking about here around histories and shared legacies and so on. And for example, we recently at our independence celebration in Grenada, we had an African entrepreneur, Mr. Dangote, be a part of that. And so I just would like you to offer us some thoughts around this sort of economic rapprochement and what potentially it means for Africa and the Caribbean in this moment.
You like Professor to speak on that? Because I'm sure you'll do well.
So in 1965, Nkrumah writes a book by the name Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism. And when he writes that book, the head of the CIA, they started panicking. Should we come out and condemn this book? Because in that book, Nkrumah teased out his philosophy of economic development, where he talks about neocolonialism, which he defined as, in theory, a country being free. But in actuality, its economic apparatus, political engagement are being controlled by the outside. So when African countries and Caribbean countries try to come together to build a more robust trade agreements among ourselves, what we are doing, in a sense, is breaking away from the colonial domination that has oppressed and suffocated our economies. In 2018, there was the Commonwealth Conference. As we all know, most Caribbean and most African countries are part of the Commonwealth. What Britain gives in aid to Africa and the Caribbean does not compare to the trillions of dollars that they get from these types of relationships. So I am so excited when I hear the commitment of a robust economic relationship between Africa and the Caribbean, because that is the only way forward. That is how we can continue this legacy and tradition of trying to free ourselves.
Yes, because we are looking also in Africa now as well to see how places like Burkina Faso, those areas, they are really working to get themselves free from colonialism. And that is the only way to go. You know, I tell you, we have to remember those young men in our prayers. I'm talking about Abraham Traore and all of those in that region. Yes, we love them. We have to pray for them that they remain strong, because there are so many things that can make you weak. Huh? But if we keep them strong and keep them working the way how they have been going, that's the only way. We can only talk about the economies of places that are free. That's the only way. So
Thank you very much. And thank you for this this reminder of Nkrumah's pivotal work. Dr. Gyamfi, thank you. At this time, I encourage those of you who are on the chat to put your questions in the chat. For those of you who are on Facebook, we're also monitoring the Facebook stream, so you can ask questions there as well. And before we move into that part of taking audience questions, I'm going to ask one of our partners from Caribbean Freedom Fighters, Ms. Ann Worm, to come and greet us on behalf of Caribbean Freedom Fighters.
Thank you, Tesfa. Good evening, everyone, and greetings from Barbados. We will be free and Africa will unite. Caribbean Freedom Fighters is an online platform dedicated to showcasing the incredible work of African descendants and Africans worldwide. You can find us primarily on YouTube. Please excuse the church bell. The colonials are always there. You can find us on YouTube, like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell. It helps with the algorithms. So, in the past, Caribbean Freedom Fighters has been known for its historically inspiring and educational exhibitions, book launches, and highly sought after lectures. We are also a staple collaborator of the Institute for the People's Enlightenment, working to preserve and share our rich heritage. We are the proud producers of the Caribbean Folklore Storytime, where we connect, interact, and share the powerful stories passed down by our foreparents. Through storytelling, we keep our oral traditions alive and celebrate our history. Beyond storytelling, we conduct and facilitate workshops on writing stories and all things cultural, ensuring that our tradition remain vibrant for future generations. As Malcolm X said, a race of people is like an individual man until it uses its own talent, takes pride in its own history, expresses its own culture, affirms its own selfhood, it can never fulfill itself. At Caribbean Freedom Fighters, we stand by this truth, embracing our culture, uplifting our people, and ensuring our stories are told by us, for us. Thank you, and please take the time to listen and really hear what our presenters are saying.
Thank you very much, Anne. We lost your audio for, okay, there you go. Thank you very much. Thank you, Caribbean Freedom Fighters. Like Anne said, they are a staple collaborator with the IPE, and so we're very happy. Folks, good news. I see the figure of Professor David Austin. I'm so happy that he could join us to offer his thoughts this evening. Dave, thank you for making it work. I know we're in deep doo-doo here in Montreal. So I'm going to bring you on right away. Do you mind?
No, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pure madness this side. It's yeah.
Yeah. So Professor David Austin is the author of Dread Poetry and Freedom, Linton Kwesi Johnson and the Unfinished Revolution, editor of Moving Against the System, the 1968 Congress of Black Writers and the Making of Global Consciousness, and You Don't Play with Revolution, the Montreal Lectures of C.L.R. James, Fear of a Black Nation, Race, Sex, and Security in 60s Montreal, and is the 2014 winner of the Casa de las Americas Prize. His writing engages with the work of C.L.R. James, Frantz Fanon, Sylvia Wynter, Hannah Arendt, Walter Rodney, and Linton Kwesi Johnson in relation to politics, poetry, and social movements. A former youth worker and community organizer, he has also produced radio documentaries for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation on C.L.R. James and Frantz Fanon. He currently teaches in Humanities and Philosophy and Religion in the Philosophy, Humanities, and Religion Department at John Albert College and in McGill's Institute for the Study of Canada. Thank you. Welcome, Professor Dave Austin, everyone.
Well, first, good evening to everybody, and really my sincere apologies. We're having a storm out here that's, I don't think we've had anything like this in probably decades. And my power went out, and trying to find a place where I could get internet access was just, so anyway, I'm here, and I'm really happy to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation to join everybody in this conversation. And a special thank you to both Tesfa and Peter for inviting me to participate in this. And you know, I thought I thought quite a bit about, you know, what to talk about today in light of our current moment, because, you know, we're in a state of crisis. I mean, the world is in a state of crisis, and it feels like we're in this state of malaise, you know, whether it's in the Congo and Haiti. Of course, we're seeing what's unfolding in Palestine and for Palestinians. You know, the United States is falling apart at the seams, seemingly. You know, here in Canada, whether it's the plight of Indigenous peoples or the high rates of incarceration of people of African descent and Indigenous peoples, climate variation and catastrophe, it just sounds like, it feels like there is a lot, right? And it's weighing heavy on the minds of people. And I can say that's absolutely true for myself. And I was watching an interview a few days ago, Mark Lamont Hill interviewing Christopher Hedges, a former journalist on Al Jazeera, and they were talking about how not only is the U.S. inching towards a form of fascism, right, and literally true, but dragging the rest of the world in it, right? So that, I think, for me, I'm sure for many other people, raises this question: well, what's the meaning of what we do? And for myself, as somebody who's an educator, intellectual, who sometimes grudgingly calls myself an academic, you know, I've had to ask myself that question: what is the meaning of what I do and what happens inside the classroom in light of this moment that we're in, which is really feels like a time of dread. I mean, on the other hand, I feel very privileged to teach inside the classroom, where I have a captive audience from one day to the next. Often, not always, enthusiastic students who are curious, pose questions. And I've always understood what I do inside the classroom as a political act, as a way of helping younger people navigate the world. And it's one of the reasons why I made the transition at one point some years ago from being a youth worker and community organizer to teaching, right? Because I think it's a important part, or can play an important part, of how we think about and imagine how we change society, how we change the world. And of course, you know, when we think about change, especially in times of dread like the moment that we're in, it requires imagination and creativity and audacity, right? To dream beyond the madness of our moment and to creatively imagine how things might be different. And, you know, when I think about the Caribbean region, you know, as a child of Caribbean parents, you know, the first thing that comes to my mind is the kind of creativity and audacity of the people of the Caribbean. As descendants of slaves, enslaved Africans, as well as Indian indentured workers, particularly in Guyana and Trinidad, as colonized people, or formerly colonized people, you know, the people of the Caribbean have had to reinvent themselves, ourselves, or what the Jamaican theorist Sylvia Wynter refers to as a kind of metamorphosis. And that has meant that historically, the Caribbean region has been a place of creative creators, intellectuals, musicians, painters, writers, great athletes who the great C.L.R. James referred to as artists in and of themselves, and talked about sports as a form of art. Of course, the power of both the political and spiritual power of reggae music, you know, especially when conjoined with Rastafari, emerged in the 1970s and captured the world's attention, took the world by storm in many respects, right? And created anthems like Redemption Song by Bob Marley, of course, and Peter Tosh's Apartheid, which really became an anthem of the anti-apartheid movement, right? This is part of the contribution that our people have made to our collective freedom and the freedom of humanity. As a child, I grew up in England for the first 10 years of my life, but I grew up knowing that my Jamaican grandfather was a Garveyite. Right? And of course, Garvey was the founder, and often we say founder of the world's biggest, greatest Black mass movement. But I think, you know, in light of the influence of Garveyism as a movement, I think it's fair to say that it is one of the world's great mass movements, and not just one of the world's great Black mass movements. And of course, here in Montreal, where I live, it was later in the 1990s that I met Henry Langdon, who was the cousin of Louise Langdon, who I'm sure you all know of by now, who was a co-founder of the Montreal chapter of the UNIA, along with Henry Langdon's uncle. And today, the UNIA chapter in Montreal is one of the oldest existing chapters of the UNIA in the world. And of course, Malcolm's mother and father were married, Louise Langdon being the mother of Malcolm X. They were married here in Montreal. So Montreal has been an interesting place in terms of thinking about the Caribbean diaspora as a place of politics and creativity, where people having migrated here from the Caribbean were forced to develop organizations and institutions to humanize their existence. And of course, as we know, Garvey was persecuted for his Pan-African message of self-determination, as was Malcolm X and many other Black and Caribbean leaders of that time and after. Trinidad's Claudia Jones, C.L.R. James, Stokely Carmichael, later known as Kwame Ture. But one of the things I think is important when we talk about the UNA as an organization is that, yes, of course, there's Marcus Garvey, the founding figure, the charismatic founding figure and spokesperson for the organization. Although it's important to remember that Amy Ashwood Garvey was also a co-founder of the organization and played a very prominent role. I'm going to come back to her in a second. But I think as we think about the world that we're in and in relation to leadership and leaders, I think one of the important things to emphasize is that the UNA was genuinely a mass organization. It was founded by Marcus Garvey and co-founded by Amy Ashwood Garvey. But at its core, it was so-called ordinary people, workers some of whom who've been actively involved in the labor movement in the Caribbean before migrating to the United States. It was, you know, nurses, foremen, industrial workers who were at the core of this movement that played this profoundly important role, not only in the Caribbean and the Caribbean's diaspora, or even the Black diaspora, but was profoundly significant for the African continent. You know, early members of the African National Congress, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, and various other figures were profoundly influenced by the UNIA. And also, it's important to note, because sometimes there's a way in which, you know, African American history is sort of homogenized as if it's only African Americans who have their roots in slavery who have played an important role in that country. But aside from people like C.L.R. James, Claudia Jones, W.B. Du Bois, who has Caribbean roots, you know, in Haiti, you know, Caribbean figures played a very important role in the Harlem Renaissance in the 1930s. Right? A very significant role, and there are so many figures. I mean, of course, we're not trying to detract away from, you know, African-American history, but more to make the point that that was part and parcel of that history. And sometimes there's a kind of nativism or nationalism that seeps in that wants to somehow dismiss the importance of that role. But, you know, I mentioned that you know, it feels as though the U.S. is dragging the world into this kind of abyss, and some people are naming it as fascism, but whatever it's called, you know, there's genuine reason to be alarmed. And I think in moments like this, returning to history and historical precedents, and particularly our own history, can be helpful. I think about Amy Ashford Garvey again, and her role in the International Friends of Ethiopia, or Abyssinia, which was based in London in the 1930s. She worked alongside figures like C.L.R. James and others, George Padmore, and they played a very important role in terms of highlighting the emergence of fascism in Europe, which is then extending its tentacles to Ethiopia and the African continent. And of course, since then, some years after, people like Amy Césaire, amongst others, made the argument that the emergence of fascism in Europe was practiced actually on the African continent. In other words, colonization was a form of fascism, which served as a dress rehearsal for the fascism that would later emerge in primarily in Germany, but also in Italy. It's referred to, at least in the English translation of Césaire's discourse on colonialism, as the boomerang effect. Right? So, maybe this is one of those moments where we turn to that historical period, among others, to look to explore how people in that moment, that was not dissimilar to ours in some respects, how did people organize for change? How did our own folks organize for change? And not only in relation, but primarily, yes, through the experience of people of African descent, but also by extension, and sometimes very consciously so, thinking about how we change this world that we're in for the better. Again, the point being that despite its small size and population, the Caribbean and its people have played a profoundly significant role in kind of global political imagination. And we need that kind of creative, imaginative space in our time. It was figures like Amy Ashford Garvey, C.L.R. James, George Padmore, alongside Nnamdi Azikiwe of Nigeria, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, and later Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, that were as members of the International African Service Bureau, which grew out of the International Friends of Ethiopia, that in many respects, through their organizational work, laid the kind of theoretical basis for the African independence movements, many of them which would emerge on the African continent, right? And, that tells us something perhaps about what a small group of people, but with political imagination and some audacity, the role that they can play on a world stage, right? Right. So we have a role to play. Caribbean folks played significant roles in all of these struggles, and we take Frantz Fanon. I mean, could have a whole conversation. In fact, this year is the 100th anniversary. It's the centenary, right? So Fanon would be 100 years old this year. I mean, we can't even begin to talk about the impact of Fanon's idea in such a wide range of circles. I teach, in addition to teaching on, kind of Pan-African and Black Canadian politics thought and Caribbean thought and tradition. I also teach on Black Indigenous politics and solidarity. And, Fanon is that person that had a profound impact on Indigenous peoples in the Canadian context, North American context, in Australia, alongside, various students' movements, the Quebec left right here in places like Montreal. You could make the argument that, Fanon, alongside Amy says they're both from Martinique, right? This tiny place, Edouard Glissant, who, in the importance of his work too, Suzanne Césaire, just one tiny island that made such an important contribution, right? Not only to kind of anti-colonial struggles and freedom, but to our collective understanding of what it means to be human, right? And to struggle for our humanity. So, when we think about all of this collectively, it presents a portrait, I think, a portrait of a region, the Caribbean archipelago, which, despite its small territories, small population, has produced some of the most remarkable figures of our time. some of whom have had profound impact on the world stage and well out of proportion to the Caribbean's small population. This is a big part of the Caribbean's history and legacy, and it seems to suggest to us, as I was suggesting earlier, saying it, as I was arguing earlier, that there's something about what that region, what the Caribbean region and its peoples have been capable of, that suggests to us something about what might be possible today when things seem to be at their worst, right? In the midst of the madness of our moment, that maybe there's another vision and there are other possibilities, right? There's space to imagine a world beyond and outside of what we're living with today. I realize, we're tight for time, so I just want to mention two things. Well, invoke two people. One is Rosie Douglas, who I'm going to assume, and I see somebody chairing this. I assume many of you know Rosie Douglas, the former Prime Minister of Dominica, of course, but who I knew as the father of a close friend at the time, Tiani Behanzin, otherwise known as Robert Douglas in those days. And Rosie would visit Montreal in the 1990s to sometimes to visit his kids or for other work. And he was very close to people like Alfie Roberts, Franklin Harvey from Grenada, who was a very close friend, the late Franklin Harvey, late Alfie Roberts too. Tim Hector from Antigua, and of course, Robert Hill, who's originally from Jamaica and a major Garvey scholar. In the 60s, they, along with a few other people, and Cools, and I'm not sure if Gene Depperdine is with us, right? They were part of an organization called the Conference Committee on West Indian Affairs, or the Caribbean Conference Committee. And they also formed what they call the CLR James Study Circle, very important organization in terms of promoting James's work at a time when he was largely forgotten. But I mentioned Rosie as coming out of this small group of Caribbean folks who were thinking about changing the Caribbean for the better, but also changing the world. And inspired by ideas of James, as I mentioned, but also people like Frantz Fanon, among others. Rosie was deported from Canada for his role in the Sir George Williams protests at what is present-day Concordia. Returned to Dominica, where of course he eventually got into politics and eventually, some decades later, became prime minister. But what is less known is that he became the director of an organization called the Mataba, which was based in Libya and was basically Libya's international solidarity/anti-imperialist organization. And at the time, of course, Libya was playing a significant role, or something of a role, in terms of thinking about African unity. And it was in his role as the director of the Mataba that Rosie Douglas from tiny Dominica negotiated critical Libyan financial support for both the African National Congress, the Irish Republican Army, and the Palestine Liberation Organization. Right? And that is a really crucial part. What's his name? The judge, his name will come to me. Irving Andre, a judge from Dominica who lives in Toronto, has written a wonderful book about Rosie Douglas. It's a biography, and he documents some of this. Many people, myself included, actually, in the 1990s, many young people traveled to Libya to get some sense of this experiment that they were involved in, that was something along the lines of socialist, African socialism, some kind of social political experiment. And we all know what has happened to Libya since. But what I want to say is that, when we talk about the ANC, the PLO, and the IRA, all organizations, by the way, which at one point or another in their history were described as terrorist organizations, right? So it gives us some sense of how history unfolds, right? In terms of how they eventually became perceived as being the legitimate organizations and and they represent legitimate spokespersons for the various causes, South Africa and Palestine and Ireland. But what I'm saying is that Rosie Douglas's vision in terms of political freedom and human solidarity is part and parcel of what led him to play that role within the Mataba. And much of that is tied to his Caribbean background, his sense of internationalism, which he developed alongside these various other Caribbean figures that I mentioned, the influence of the ideas of figures like C.L.R. James, and of course, his lifelong friends, Tim Hector and Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, sorry, otherwise known as Stokely Carmichael when he was younger. So, we have played a role, our folks have played a role in terms of the making of modern history that is well out of proportion to our size. And in this moment that we're in, I think it's profoundly important that we revisit that time, we revisit that history, we revisit ideas such as solidarity, right? And some of the many intellectuals who have written about human freedom. We have a role to play because as Ndaye, who was a leader in the Red Thread organization, a former member of the Working People's Alliance, as she made the point, at the end of the day, the point is to change the world. Right? The point is really to change the world. And I'm going to end with a quote from Ndaye, from her book that was published posthumously, edited by Alyssa Trotz. And she says in the book is called The Point is to Change the World. She says, to stop sinking under the weight of our pessimism about our capacity to fight, we have to take inspiration from our own history and from the history of other countries, learn the lessons of their weakness, setbacks, and failures, and build on their strengths. We have to learn from the willingness of those who fought before us to take the risk of rising up against the seemingly immovable forces. All right, so I'm going to end there. And thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. What just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful way to ground us again, touching very much on things that were spoken of earlier in the conversation, touching on the idea of the internationalism of these Caribbean thinkers, our shared diasporic trajectory, or shared knowledge of Africanness, the important historical work of the UNIA and its implications for us in the present moment. If you're like me, then you want this conversation to continue forever and ever and ever. But we are aware that folks have given of their time to be with us this evening. And so we're going to keep moving along. Again, Dave, we are just so grateful that you could find a way to get to be with us this evening. I'm so happy that you could come in and of course, Dr. Gyamfi and Dr. Jacobs. At this time, I'm going to pass it over to Marieve to bring on the newly inaugurated LADIG organization, diaspora organization, and then we're going to close up.
Okay, thank you. And I echo the sentiments shared by my co-moderator. And as I listen to Dr. David, I can literally see that thread tying all of the presentations and all that I've heard this evening together. And, some things stick out to me, like the culture, the creative arts, doing what you can in your own space, that consciousness. And the job of the conscious is to make the unconscious conscious. And all that was tied in, and it was an apt way to close off all the presentations this evening. And so without any further ado, I want to invite Montgomery Alexander, a fellow Ladigian and in the diaspora, and he's going to share with us a bit about the Ladi Community Development and Enrichment Partnership. So I turn over the floor to him.
Good evening to the esteemed panelists for such inspiring presentations, especially at this juncture in global history, where there is so much confusion and there's so much despair. It's great to know that we could draw upon the strength of our ancestors in terms of navigating the path that we are faced with, because there is so much doom and gloom. Wherever you look, people are searching for answers. People are throwing their hands up and feeling that we're in the final days of this civilization. But as the scriptures say, there's more to come. This is just the beginning. And people have to be prepared to steel themselves with knowledge, and collaboration among our peoples, because and I just want to just say that before I jump into what I'm going to speak about, but I just couldn't let this moment pass without recognizing the significance of what has transpired here, what is transpiring, and the inspiration that's been dished out here, because I think so many people need to hear those words for them to know that there is going to be light at the end of the tunnel. I remember in the morning of the revolution, Morris Bishop said, the long night of suffering has ended and freedom has come. You know, and the song the radio station played was Suffering in the Land, which was banned, a song by Jimmy Cliff. That music was played and everybody knew that the shackles were broken and they ran out into the streets. That was March 13, 1979. So there's a lot of hope to drive us forward. This evening, my name is Monty Alexander from Ladig product. I grew up right next to Malcolm X's grandaunt, and I was about 8 years old when Malcolm was assassinated, because I heard his aunt screaming and bawling that he killed Malcolm. I was too young to take in the gravity of what had happened, but as I grew, I get to understand it in its fullness, what a great human being he was, and also his mother, who was a trailblazer. In the spirit of Malcolm X and Louise Little, I want to thank the Ladig Heritage and Honors Program for giving a newly formed or forming organization a minute to introduce themselves. And in the spirit of Malcolm X, Louise Little, and the spirit of Grenada, a number of young people, some of whom I taught when I was a school teacher at the Holy Innocents Anglican School, that's 100 years ago, but they have grown up, very good, great young men and young women, and they have traveled to different parts of the world, and they have recognized how much the community has invested in them, and they feel an urge to give back. And strangely started with talk of having a reunion in 2026. But some of the elders in the diaspora, including myself, said, well, you know, we could use the energy that has been generated by a reunion to create something with lasting effects. because a reunion is like a one-off. The day after the reunion, ask the question, what next? Everybody would go back to their respective communities and just look at the pictures and videos of the reunion. But we said that we could work with that energy to form an organization. And the members came up with the name of LADI, Community Development and Enrichment Partnership, a very big name that we would have to live up to. And so my duty here is to introduce the organization. It's a young organization. The foundation have been set, been established. As I said early on, these young people, many of them who were born after I left Grenada, because I've been out here like 30 odd years, but I applaud their strength, their patriotism, and the willingness to recognize that they live in Canada, live in the United States of America, they live in the United Kingdom, they live in a part of the Caribbean, they live in other European countries, maybe as far as they also maybe some who live down under, they all want to come together to do something. And this is really important because we, the elder folks who are speaking with them, would say it's a good opportunity to bridge the generation gap, because a number of us would be exiting the stage in a couple of years. We have lived more years already than we have in front of us. And we welcome the opportunity to mentor the younger folks who are going to be there much longer than us. So we want to be able to bridge the generation gap, because a number of people have traveled and would like to come back and collaborate with everybody within the community. The other part of it is that there is going to be a link between the organizations that are already existing in the community, doing work for people in the community, because we do not want it to be a case where people parachute from the diaspora and they come with all the big talk and the big action and they hold an activity for a week or something, so and then disappear. We want to have full participation from the organizations and institutions in the community. I want to say the community, we talk about Ladig and surrounding areas, because Ladig is like a central meeting point. Historically, it was the place where commerce took place, because most of the shops and so on were there, stores and so, and people went to find work in Ladig, but they came from as far as Union, Coast Royal, Bellevue, St. James, Mount St. Ovens, Afford Village, and you name it, all the areas around. They came to Ladig, and these are the people we calling on in the reunion. So it will not just be people who live in Ladig, but people who are from all the satellite areas around Ladig who will be coming together to work. And an effort is being made to touch base with all these people to make sure that it is truly collaborative, respect all the organizations for what they've been doing, and to determine how we could work together. I was fortunate to speak to one of the leading members of your organization, and he's also excited in terms of the things that we could do. But at this point, the framework has been put together, but we thought it was a good idea to make the introduction about what is going to take place. And then later, at some point in time, there could be more material given and more highlights as to what is happening. The main thing that is being worked on now, because that is what is driving the energy, is the reunion for late July, early August 2026, because the young people are so excited to see their folks back home and to see each other, because they have scattered in all parts of the globe, and they're very excited to get back to Ladig to do a lot of great things. Things like health clinic, sports clinic, drama, and a lot of other things that they really, really want to get back there to do. So any questions, I'm willing to answer what I could. And if I cannot answer anything, I'd bring it back to the organization to furnish answers to those questions. Thank you very much for giving me opportunity to make my pitch at this meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alexander, and we look forward to collaborating and partnering with you and the organization as we chart the way forward. At this moment, I would like to take the time to express my sincere gratitude to our esteemed scholars who have contributed to today's panel discussion. Your insights, expertise, and thoughtful perspectives have enriched our understanding and deepened our appreciation on the topic at hand. You have contributed to today's enriching discussion on Pan-Africanism and the profound legacies of Malcolm X, Louise Little, and Marcus Garvey. You have also illuminated the connections between the Caribbean and African heritage and the revolutionary contributions to Black liberation, self-determination, and global unity. Thank you. It was much appreciated. And so at this time, I would just like to invite our scholars again. If you have any last words for us in 1 minute, anything you want to leave with us so that we will keep that on the back of our minds as we continue to reflect on the presentations and our role as community organizations, as ordinary, simple citizens in this way forward. So I yield the virtual mic to our scholars.
So to briefly point out, I would say it's important that we think about Blackness, Africanness, and the struggle for Black liberation as a global phenomenon. So I'll end there.
Thank you, Dr. Gyamfi. Dr. Jacobs, you have to unmute.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. It was a pleasure being here and meeting, especially with Dr. Gyamfi, and also to see my friend David Austin again. Hadn't seen him for a long time. Looks so different now, but yes,
I'm
yes.
I'm older.
So still nice. Hey, all of us are old. Next month I should be 71. So it's not a problem. I'm still ready to go. So thank you. I think that something might have sparked some person words or something to do something different. So let's see what has happened. Let's see what has happened. Thank you very much for having me as well. Okay.
I would just say thank you too. I'm sorry that I missed most of it. I would have liked to have heard the other speakers. But we just need more opportunities like this for these kinds of conversations. I realize that I've become even more ambivalent than I used to be about academia and academic conversations. And I think it's conversations like this, not to dismiss academia, but conversations like this that are really important. And also, I just want to acknowledge, I think it's an old friend who I see if it's the same Andre Lewis. I notice he's present. But yeah, thank you for having me here. Yeah, thank you. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much to all our scholars, all our panelists, to the folks from LADIG, the Caribbean Freedom Fighters, Grenada, the Grenada National Reparations Committee, the IP Dare to Understand series, all of the people on the chats. I noticed that my dear supervisor, Nalini Mohabir, she was on the chat earlier on, I believe. My committee member for my PhD work, Dr. Laurie Lambert, is also on there. Dr. Merle Collins, a favorite of ours, one of the persons whose work has inspired this work. Another stalwart of the Ladig community, Mr. Elwin McQuilkin, Black Wizard, is on there with us or was on there earlier. I see some of my folks in my PhD program at Concordia on there, Mark and Morris. Thank you so much for coming and supporting me, of course, and for supporting the work of thinking more broadly about the things that ail us, thinking about how we confront the present moment, and knowing that we have the tools, we have this breadth of work, this breadth of thinking and knowledge that imbues us as African descended people, imbues us as African diasporic people, as Caribbean people, as Black peoples of the world, to continue to fight for our collective liberation in all the ways that we can. This series of lectures continues next year. We're going to be back again. The work of the IPE also continues in various forms, so look out for us on your social medias. Thank you for the people on the Facebook page, the people who shared the stream, people who were on YouTube with us. We are always very, very grateful that you take the time to come and be with us in conversations like these. Dave, thank you for the reminder that we are on unceded Indigenous territory in Montreal, in Jojage. We are still fighting settler colonialism in Canada. We are, in many ways, working to retrieve and to recover our own Indigenous histories and traditions in what Indigenous peoples who lived on what is now Grenada called Camahan. And so there is work to be done. And our scholars this evening have reminded us that we can do the work, and that one of the ways that we do the work is in solidarity, is in collaboration, and is in community. So thank you very much again to everyone who was with us this evening. And the struggle continues. Thank you.
Ashe. Ashe.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. Yes.